world-renowned ethologist and conservationist, Dr. Jane Goodall. In the last 6 decades, her research has transformed scientific perceptions of the relationship between humans and the rest of the animal kingdom. And today, her mission has evolved into a quest to empower every individual to make the world a better place for people, other animals, and the planet we share. Dr. Goodall is the founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, a global leader in chimpanzee and habitat protection. Jane is a United Nations Messenger of Peace and Dame of the British Empire, and it brings me great pleasure to welcome her to the virtual stage.
Hello, this is Jane Goodall. Thank you for inviting me to share a few words with you. As you all know, we're living in dark times, politically, socially, and especially environmentally, where we're faced with the twin threats of climate change and loss of biodiversity. And we're also battling with a pandemic. And all of this, of course, we brought upon ourselves by our disrespect of nature and animals. It's so important to realize that we're part of and depend on the natural world for clean air, water, food, well, everything. But it's healthy ecosystems that we depend on. In the forests of Gombe, I learned how everything was interconnected, each plant and animal species playing its role. And as more species become locally extinct, this can have a devastating effect on the whole ecosystem and may in fact lead to ecosystem collapse. People are finally waking up to the damage we're inflicting on the planet. There are rewilding programs in many countries, and sometimes species that have become locally extinct have been successfully reintroduced. The best example of how the reintroduction of key species can regenerate a damaged ecosystem is provided by the reintroduction of wolves and bison into the Yellowstone area. I suspect most of you are familiar with that story. It's a wonderful story. As well, people are starting to realize how industrial agriculture, especially factory farms, is devastating the environment and causing massive loss of biodiversity. The need for regenerative farming, permaculture, and so on is becoming more widely recognized. When I began the chimp research in 1960, the Gombe National Park was part of the Great Forest Belt that stretched across equatorial Africa. But when I flew over the area in the late 1980s, I was shocked to see the park was just a tiny island of forest surrounded by bare hills. There were more people living there than the land could support. They were cutting down trees to get more land for farming or to make money from charcoal or timber. They were desperately trying to live. And I realized if we didn't help them to find ways of living without destroying their environment, we couldn't save chimps, forests, or anything else. This led to the very holistic program that we called Takari, that began in 1994. From the start, we worked with village leaders to improve health and education facilities and to regenerate the degraded farmland without the use of chemical pesticides and herbicides. And we provided microcredit opportunities for villagers to start their own environmentally sustainable small businesses. And we provided scholarships for girls so that women had a chance for secondary education. Once people realized that we cared about them and that protecting the environment is not only for wildlife, but also their own health and future, they became our partners in conservation. They've stopped farming on the steep slopes and greatly reduced erosion. They've also reduced cutting down of of trees, and gradually trees have grown back from seeds and roots that were left in the ground, and insects, birds and mammals have returned. We use the Takari method of community-led conservation in 6 other African countries where we work. Our research team at Gombe includes a veterinarian, and we monitor the health of not only the chimpanzees and baboons, but also of the people and livestock in the surrounding villages. In other words, we've been employing the One Health concept that formalizes what has long been known, that animal health, human health, and the health of the environment are interdependent, and the health of one affects the health of all. For example, streams contaminated with pathogens from human or livestock in the villages flow through the national park and pose health hazards for both animals and humans working in the park. Some animals, such as baboons and bush pigs, may move out of the park to raid crops, and they may infect domestic animals. As you all know, more than 70% of all new human diseases are zoonotic in origin. And it's not only that viruses, bacteria, and so on can spill over to humans, where they may create new diseases, such as HIV, AIDS, Ebola, MERS, avian influenza, and almost certainly COVID-19. But this can also work the other way round, with human pathogens spilling over to animals. Gorillas and chimpanzees, with their close genetic makeup to humans, are particularly susceptible to human diseases, and they should be treated with extra care by veterinary services, wildlife authorities, and researchers. And of course, this applies to orangutans and to a lesser extent other primates too. And finally, wild animals can infect domestic animals and vice versa. The treatment of disease in wild animals has become increasingly important, especially for those species which are so endangered and breed slowly. And I want to recognize the part played by a number of the best zoos, because they provide veterinarians with the opportunity to work with captive wild animals and then share their knowledge with vets working in the field. And very often they train those vets in the zoo. Obviously, as human populations move ever further into wildlife habitat, taking their livestock and dogs with them, it's increasingly important for collaboration between veterinarians who are working with domestic animals and those working with wildlife, and doctors, human doctors, who are treating diseases that can infect both humans and animals, clearly need to collaborate with veterinarians working with domestic and/or wild animals. The OIE Wildlife Health Framework is working within the human-animal ecosystem interface to study animal pathogens, detect and manage wildlife disease, and share information with the relevant people in an effort to reduce the risk of further spillovers to humans. Finally, I hope that this conference will be very successful and provide a wonderful opportunity for sharing information to the benefit of all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Goodall. Some very thoughtful and very relevant comments for us all today on World Wildlife Day. You heard Dr. Goodall mention the OIE and the Wildlife Health Framework. So our next suite of presentations will shine the spotlight on the OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health. Let me share our speakers with you. So I'm delighted to have a number of colleagues joining us today. Our first speaker is Dr. Keith Hamilton, who is head of the Preparedness and Resilience Department at the OIE headquarters in Paris. Keith will give us an introduction to the OIE Wildlife Health Programme. And next up, we will hear from Dr. Mariana Delgado, who is going to tell us about wildlife health surveillance. She is currently an intern at the Preparedness and Resilience Department at headquarters. And our final introductory presentation will be given by Dr. Jacinth Guigma, who is Project Officer and the Regional Coordinator of the Ibu Sersi project, and he is based at the OIE Regional Representation for Africa in Bamako. Jacinth will talk to us about early detection systems for wildlife. So I'll pass over to their presentations now. Thank you.
So happy Wildlife Day. My name is Keith Hamilton. I'm head of the Preparedness and Resilience Department at OIE's headquarters in Paris, France. I'm a veterinarian, originally from Jersey in the Channel Islands, which is part of the UK. Today, I'd like to try and describe why wildlife health is important, identify some of the challenges that we face today, and also talk about some of the actions that OIE is taking to address wildlife health. Before I start, I'd like to thank Mariana Delgado for these wonderful slides that she's prepared for me to support the presentation. So, why is the OIE concerned about wildlife health? Well, we should all be concerned about wildlife, but we need to be more than just concerned. We need to act to preserve wildlife health and biodiversity. And why? Well, in a nutshell, wildlife is essential for life on Earth. Our health, the health of all animals, and the health of the environment depends on having a healthy and balanced ecosystem. This ecosystem depends on wildlife health and biodiversity. Here are a few examples. Bats and bees are essential pollinators. Small mammals maintain soil health. Coral reefs maintain an incredibly diverse and rich ecosystem which produces oxygen and captures carbon. Fruit eaters disperse seeds, and predators control the populations of other species. Wildlife are valuable assets for many communities across the world. Wildlife support the lives and livelihoods, either as a source of food, think of all the people who depend on fishing or hunting to live, or as a source of income. Again, think about the importance of wildlife tourism. Think how many countries depend on safaris or other forms of wildlife tourism for a large part of their economy. Wildlife is also very important for our mental, social, and spiritual well-being. It's hard to measure in units, but wildlife make us happy. The joy we get from hearing or seeing birds, other wildlife, even in a city. The joy we get diving and exploring coral reefs. Wildlife provide happiness to people across the planet. For any of you who have children, and for all of you who were children, you'll know that stories about wildlife played a very important role in your upbringing, your education, connecting us with nature and providing us with social values. And as we get older, stories about wildlife, metaphors, provide us and support us with our philosophical and spiritual education. Just imagine a world without wildlife. It would be bleak. It would be a dystopian nightmare. Some facts help to highlight some of the challenges that we currently face. 88.8% of species on Earth are animal species. The animal kingdom is the most biodiverse kingdom on the planet. But in the last 50 years, an average of 68% decrease in population sizes of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles and fish has been reported. 40% of the world's amphibians, 25% of its mammals, and 14% of its birds are threatened with extinction. It's staggering to think of how much damage has been done in such a short period of time. Humans and animals, both domestic and wild, share their ecosystem with a multitude of microorganisms, viruses, protozoa, bacteria, fungi. And these microorganisms also provide essential support to the ecosystem. They are part of the ecosystem, like humans and animals. A tiny proportion of these microorganisms are harmful and can cause human or animal disease. We call these microorganisms pathogens. The discovery of pathogens as a cause of the disease is relatively new. We've only really known that pathogens are responsible for causing infectious disease for just over 100 years, thanks to the German microbiologist Robert Koch. But it's not just the pathogens that are responsible for disease. Infectious disease results from a complex interaction between the host, you, me, or a wild animal or a domestic animal, the pathogen, and the environment. Over the past century, we've been able to detect emerging disease events. We've been able to detect pathogens with greater capacity as time has evolved. Over the past century, we've detected a greater frequency of emerging disease events in both humans and animals. Well-known examples include HIV, SARS, some strains of influenza such as bird flu, and most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic. These are well-known emerging diseases in humans, but there have also been many emerging diseases in animals which threaten their health and welfare, and also threaten biodiversity. We know that disease is a primary driver of wildlife population declines worldwide. So emerging disease events affect both humans and animals. We know that many emerging diseases in humans have an animal origin, but we also acknowledge that human activity is responsible for driving disease emergence. Factors such as climate change, wildlife trade, deforestation, and certain farming practices create the conditions for diseases to emerge. To take preventative action rather than reacting to disease events, we need to do something about the drivers of disease emergence. We need to maintain a healthy, balanced ecosystem, and we need to use our valuable resources more sustainably. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us about the potential losses from infectious diseases, the devastating impact on humanity, the deaths and the suffering, and also the economic losses, which also result in suffering for many people, particularly the most vulnerable people. There are plenty of academic studies that highlight that it's more effective, more cost-effective to take preventative action rather than to react once a disease has emerged. Now, cost-benefit studies are very important because that is what decision makers and politicians listen to. So we know that we need to address the drivers of disease emergence. We also know that we shouldn't blame wildlife for emerging diseases. They're also victims. Emerging diseases also threaten animals and biodiversity. So what is the OIE and what can it do? The OIE is the international organisation with the mandate to improve animal health and welfare, including wildlife health. It has 182 member countries and was established in 1924, over 20 years before the UN or WHO. The OIE recognises that the health of humans, animals and the environment are inextricably linked, and therefore the health of our planet depends on action being taken across all of these sectors: public health, animal health, and environmental health. And we call this concept One Health. The OIE sets out to protect wildlife health to achieve One Health through a coordinated set of actions. This is the goal of our wildlife health programme. And because wildlife health is a collective responsibility involving multiple sectors and disciplines, to implement its wildlife health programme, the organisation is working closely with international partners working in agriculture, conservation, public health, and the environment. And action is needed at all levels, at global level, regional level, national level, and community level. Community level is particularly important because this is where things happen. But coordination at national, regional, and international level is incredibly important to make sure that we all work towards the same goals and that we take the best approaches to reach those goals that are based on science. Now, some of the activities that OIE is undertaking to address wildlife health include collecting, analysing and disseminating information on the global disease situation in wildlife, developing guidance to reduce the risk of disease spillover events, creating global networks of wildlife expertise, developing training and improving capacity. If you want to know more or work more closely with OIE, please contact me or one of my colleagues. In the meantime, happy Wildlife Day.
Hello, my name is Mariana Delgado. It's a pleasure to be here. And for this presentation, we are going to discuss about wildlife health surveillance around the globe. We are going to highlight some information from the 2021 OIE Wildlife Health Survey. So, arriving to the in-country wildlife disease surveillance survey, this survey was available on the 3 official languages of the OIE. It was composed of 9 sections, 54 questions, and was submitted by 103 of the members, the OIE members. The main objective of this survey is to better understand the OIE members' wildlife disease surveillance systems, including the reporting of diseases in country or in our system WAHIS, OIE WAHIS or OIE WAHIS Wild, the veterinary authority role related to legal and illegal wildlife trade, and other interesting topics that you will see when you read the report. The results of this survey will be used to inform the activities identified under the OIE focal point for wildlife and their partners on this thematic across the OIE regions. So let's see the current situation. By now, we have more than half, 54.4% of the countries that respond to have a wildlife disease surveillance program. And these programs have general surveillance and a targeted surveillance. So 94.6% of the countries have some kind of investigation of wildlife mortality whenever an event of wildlife mortality or morbidity appears. And also 85.7% of these countries have targeted surveillance. That means that the program includes testing of opportunistically collected or apparently healthy wildlife specimens for the research of a specific disease. In other numbers, 63.1% of the members, rather they have or not a program to wildlife disease surveillance. They have limitations or impediments whenever they have to collect, handle, or transport wildlife samples, and also when they have to analyze and get to a diagnosis. Nevertheless, some effort has been seen in this survey because 62.1% of the members maintains records from wildlife mortality or morbidity events. So somehow you have epidemiological surveillance. And also 66% of the countries respond to have implement a response to manage a wildlife health event. So yes, they are aware of the problem. So we are going to see how does the countries respond and manage a wildlife health event. So here we have question 7a. The question was, what types of responses has your country previously used or is using to manage a wildlife event? So we can see that the most used response by the countries is to remove the carcasses from the field to prevent the spread of diseases. The response is followed by the vaccination of domestic animals, then for enhanced biosecurity or livestock, public health measures, or fencing the domestic animals. As you will see, the first 5 responses of these cases and responses are focused on protecting the health of domestic animals and not focused on or concerned about the health of wild animals. So now that we know that they care about and they are doing some research, there are some programs, there are some efforts to respond whenever a wildlife health event happens. Now we are going to see how does the countries manage wildlife health. So for the lead, 47.5% of the countries said that the agency on the lead of management of wildlife health are the veterinary services, followed by the wildlife services, environmental services, and last but not least, national parks and protected areas. However, the source of information comes from another part. And this is where we have the information of wildlife health. The first agency in charge of wildlife health is the Agriculture Agency, followed by environmental agencies, and for some countries, academia. For some countries, academia can be really, really important as a source of information. And with all the lead, all the information, who is in charge of responding whenever an event happens? So it depends. It depends, and that's why we ask them these 3 questions, question 6a, 6b, and 6c. In this question, we ask them whenever there is a significant wildlife morbidity or mortality event within your country, will need to be informed. The difference between the question is that the first one applies just in diseases affecting only wildlife species. The second question is wildlife and domestic species, and the last one is whenever wildlife disease can have a zoonotical potential. So we may see that whenever the event affects only wildlife species or affects wildlife and domestic species, the one in charge of the response are the Agency of Agriculture and the Agency of Environment. However, whenever the event involves a disease that has a zoonotic potential, that means and can affect humans, the Agency of Public Health will be involved. And how does the OIE intervene on this problem? So the OIE has a role on wildlife health surveillance. We have the wildlife health framework. We also have a database, the OIE WAHIS, that allows the country to have transparency about diseases around the world and to be aware of wildlife diseases, and also codes and guidelines. So as a closure and not a conclusion, because you will have to read the report and you will see that there's a lot more of information. Today we have seen that 68% of the population side of wild vertebrate species has declined in the last 50 years. We've also seen that 71.8% of animal origin emerging infectious diseases that affect humans being has a wildlife origin. We have also seen that the in-country management of wildlife health used to be on charge of veterinary services for 47.5% of the countries. The veterinary services are the one on the lead. And the one on the lead of the source of information and the one who will respond whenever a wildlife health event are the agencies of agriculture and also environment. So we have seen the current situation of wildlife health surveillance, and we can say that we can all agree that wildlife health surveillance is really important for the preservation of wildlife. And for ending this presentation, I have to repeat that wildlife is essential for long-term preservation of human and animal health, and also their well-being, and the wildlife is critically important for the integrity of every ecosystem. So to prevent an event and mitigate the current situation, wildlife health surveillance is essential, and that will be also essential for recovering key species and restore the ecosystems. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bonjour, je suis Yacine Digma, je suis vétérinaire, coordonnateur technique du projet euh, Bamako. Échanger avec vous des maladies à faune sauvage. Donc, déjà, la question fondamentale, pourquoi la violence au niveau de la faune sauvage? Ce qui est important de savoir, c'est que la partie infectieuses chez les humains sont d'origine animale, donc des zoonoses. Et il y a également c'est plus difficile de se pencher sur l'évolution de ces maladies au niveau des animaux. C'est important qu'il y ait une surveillance de la faune sauvage. Cette surveillance au niveau de la faune sauvage. En l'absence de maladie, ce qu'il faut faire, c'est des activités de veille. Cette activité de veille va permettre effectivement d'identifier précocement les événements inhabituels afin de prendre toutes les dispositions nécessaires pour pouvoir circonscrire ce mal-là. Et également, ce qu'il faut faire en l'absence de maladie, il faut démontrer que la maladie est absente. Et de ce fait, il faut faire une enquête sérologique, faire des prélèvements et des analyses de labo pour effectivement prouver que la maladie est absente. Et en présence de maladie, il faut justement faire une surveillance de proximité, ce qui permettra en tout cas d'avoir une idée sur la prévalence de la maladie et de détecter rapidement les nouveaux cas afin de mettre en place tout ce qui est comme mesure conservatoire pour pouvoir circonscrire la maladie et par la suite procéder à son contrôle. Pour ce qui concerne les piliers de la surveillance, le premier pilier, c'est la détection. Mais il faut noter que cette détection doit être obligatoirement suivie d'une notification. Donc, la notification va nous permettre d'avoir toutes les données nécessaires pour pouvoir procéder à une analyse et à une interprétation. Et l'interprétation des données issues de cette notification va nous permettre certainement d'avoir tous les éléments nécessaires pour pouvoir procéder à une investigation et l'investigation va permettre de savoir de quoi il s'agit pour pouvoir en tout cas prendre des mesures idoines pour résoudre le problème. Et ce qui est important à ce niveau, c'est qu'après l'investigation, il faut toujours Il faut toujours assurer un feedback, hein, communiquer les résultats de l'investigation à l'ensemble des acteurs qui ont été à l'origine de la notification. Nous allons voir maintenant quelques types de surveillance applicables au niveau de la zone sauvage ainsi que leurs avantages et leurs inconvénients. La première surveillance applicable au sein de la faune sauvage, c'est la surveillance active et elle est basée sur la recherche active des pathogènes. Et comme avantage, c'est que cette surveillance permet en tout cas de détecter en tout cas des maladies sans pour autant observer des signes cliniques. Et l'inconvénient pour cette surveillance, c'est qu'elle ne permet pas de détecter des maladies exotiques, tout simplement parce que d'autres espèces n'ont pas été prises en compte au niveau de l'échantillonnage. La surveillance passive, il faut dire que cette surveillance passive, la surveillance implique plusieurs acteurs, notamment les vétérinaires, une large proportion de la population cible et comme avantage aussi, cette surveillance implique acteurs en tout cas plus disciplinés. L'inconvénient pour la surveillance passive, c'est une notification parce que certains maladies vont passer. Et comme inconvénient aussi, c'est que cette surveillance degré aussi qui peut être lié au chauffage. L'avantage de cette surveillance, c'est que c'est le suivant qui est mis en avant parce que nous avons les acteurs. Il y a beaucoup de informations sur la taille hein, des animaux sauvages. Et la deuxième difficulté aussi, c'est que la maquette nécessite la capacité et la limite de la des diversité de projet et le sursis. Et c'est un projet qui a démarré en Afrique centrale, notamment les situations. Le projet a trois parties. Tout ce qui est euh, communication autour du renforcement des protocoles qui concerne les activités de sensibilisation depuis le début. Cette communication dans les activités les communications également sont à proximité des réserves du parc et également appelé pour également le jeu Sérieux Alerte qui a été développé par Swine. Et ce jeu prend en compte l'ensemble des acteurs qui sont impliqués dans la chaîne de suivi. Et l'objectif de ce jeu, c'est à connaître leur rôle dans la chaîne afin d'attirer des recherches projets scientifiques chez les acteurs des choses sur lui, à partir de là, on a pu suivre le mouvement des choses sur lui. Et on a l'habitude de se retrouver au Burkina, au Mali, et à la mécanisme des espèces et de pouvoir faire cela. Également, les résultats de recherche permettent de un peu situer sur il y a une chose qui est identifiée comme une de virus mais en dessous de l'analyse j'ai ressenti que important, ce qui veut dire le rôle en tout cas comme réservoir à virus également je là, mais pour et je vous invite qui en bas de
Thank you very much indeed for the informative presentations. To find out more about the OIE work on wildlife, you can check out the brand new OIE Wildlife portal. I added the link in the chat box on Zoom, and perhaps one of my colleagues could do so also on the YouTube streaming. Okay, and now I hope you're all have your phones at the ready, and we're going to continue with our interactive session. So let me just share this. I will just go to full screen, and that should be present. Okay. So if you're not already joined, if you could join using the QR code is perhaps the quickest way, or else the direct link is in the chat box, or you can go to menti.com and enter this code, so 6342 9668. If you have any problems to join, then please let one of my colleagues know by sending us a message, and we'll try to help you. Let me see, I'm just watching to see how many people are able to join us. I'm going to wait just for a few seconds. Our live streaming on YouTube is a little bit of lag with us on Zoom, so we'll just give our colleagues that are joining on YouTube a chance to connect. As I said, the quickest way is just use the QR code on your phone. If you have any comments or questions on any of the presentations so far, then you can also start giving us your questions via Mentimeter, and hopefully that will show up. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so first of all, if you could let us know where you're from. So if you can pin where you are on the map. So I think this is easiest if you've got a touch screen, either your computer or your or you've got your phone attached, linked up to our Mentimeter. This is great. Oh wow, look how early it is for some people over there in the West. We were certainly expecting to see more participants from a bit closer to the Japan and the Asia and the Pacific timeline here, but it's absolutely fantastic to see people from across continents. So we've got 48 people, 49 have joined us with their pins. I see we have a total of about 130 joining us on Zoom. So maybe just give another few seconds for people to join. If you do need to find it, the link is at the top, so you can just go to menti.com at any point if you drop off the connection. So let's go to our next slide. We've got 60 of you joining. Fantastic. Again, I'm really impressed by those of you joining, whether it's very, very early in the morning or even very late at night. So welcome everyone. Okay. Oh, people still coming in. Okay, I'm gonna wait another few seconds. This is really exciting to see where everyone's coming from. Okay, it's slowing down a little bit. Okay, that's great. We have 69 of you with us. Great. Let's continue then. 70, nice round number. Okay. So just to find out who is with us today, if you could let us know what is your area of interest. Let's just find out a little bit more about each other. We know that lots of people with different backgrounds are interested in wildlife, so let us know what your background is. So are you a veterinarian? Are you an ecologist, a marine biologist? So what have we got so far? So we've got wildlife conservation, biodiversity, veterinary laboratory. This is great that we see so many different people that are interested in working with wildlife and looking into wildlife health matters. What else? We've got disease prevention, wildlife rescue and care, veterinary pathologists. This is looking like a great team that we've got with us today. Excellent. If I can just ask you to stop drawing on our screen, and perhaps one of my colleagues could assist. Thank you very much. So we've got physician, a large animal veterinarian. We've got some people still letting us know where they're coming from. That's great too. Lots of different countries are represented. Okay, stakeholders collaboration, early detection systems. Certainly that's relevant for our last presentation there. Okay, I think that's almost everyone. So I'll give you another few seconds. Hopefully you can just press send and submit your response, and we'll just move on to the next slide. So 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. Okay, now it comes to the exciting time. We're going to have a quiz. Now for these questions, you get points for getting the correct answer in the fastest time. So if you can let us know if you're joined, so that's everyone. If you want to add your name, then that will let us know who you are in our leaderboard, which will come up shortly. So we've got 71 people there. Great, 72, excellent. Okay, so we're just going to start the countdown. So we're going to go to the first question. Which of these are not wild animals? So the options are going to be on your phone. We have a timer. So we have another 30 seconds. So do we think bees, crocodiles, frogs, non-human primates, owls or unicorns? Just another few seconds and then we'll see what the answer is, see how many of you got it right. Okay, I see if you're not able to join on Mentimeter, you can still join partway through. Maybe if one of my colleagues can help again. Great, well, I'm very pleased to see that most of you figured out that unicorns, at least according to the OIE definition of wild animals, unicorns are not included in that group, but bees are, so very important are bees. Okay, so our next question. Okay, so which wildlife species are not covered in the OIE standards? Most of the standards adopted by the OIE are towards food-producing animals and some other domesticated species like horses, donkeys, dogs, and ferrets. But which of these wildlife species are not covered in the OIE standards? Again, just a few seconds left to go. I think we've got almost everyone has answered. Bees, crocodiles, frogs, non-human primates, owls, and palm civets. Okay, so I'm again very pleased to see that most of you picked palm civets. So all the others would be covered by the OIE standards. Good work, guys. Okay, so next up, question 3. So which option is not an emerging disease? Again, this is based on the OIE definition of an emerging disease, which is available online. Maybe not time to look it up just now. Which of these is not an emerging disease? So a new agent isolated in a volcano or in the deep sea, a new occurrence of an infection, a new occurrence of a disease, or a new occurrence of an infestation. Again, if I could kindly ask you not to draw on the screen, thank you. Just a few seconds to go. Okay, time's up. The answer is number 1. So well done, those 49 people who selected the right answer. Great. Okay, for question 4, can I please ask? That's great. Thank you very much for your assistance. Question 4. So this is one Keith mentioned earlier. What is the goal of the OIE Wildlife Health Framework? Again, we've got 6 different options here. So we're talking about the framework that Keith mentioned. Is it to monitor wildlife for zoonotic diseases, to protect wildlife health, to achieve One Health, to publish books on wildlife health, to report disease in wildlife, to restrict wildlife, to prevent human contact, or to teach veterinarians to treat sick wildlife? So we've got almost all of you have answered. We've got a few more minutes here, a few more seconds, sorry. You can submit your answer. Okay, I think that's almost everyone. And here comes the answer. I hope you got all this right. Okay, most of you, excellent. Those of you that were listening well to Keith's presentation, so to protect wildlife health, to achieve One Health. Okay, so this is our last quick question in this session. So remember, faster means you get more points. Which of these is not part of the OIE's mission? So which of these options? Animal health and welfare management, reporting animal disease situation worldwide, strengthening veterinary services, or building human hospitals. So these are all, I'm sure you'll agree, pretty important things to be doing. So which of these is not part of the OIE's mission? Okay, we've almost got everyone's answers. We've got 65 so far. Again, if you're not able to join yet, if you could try again, because our next couple of questions, we're going to be asking for your input. So I see a few people still putting their answer in chat, but if you could try to join on Mentimeter, that would be really helpful, so that we can get everyone in the group for the next couple of interactive questions. Okay, and I hope we've got 100% for this. Let's see what we've got. Almost, very, very close, 65 of you. So obviously we're really looking at animal health and welfare. So although we work very closely with our colleagues in human health, we're not, part of our mission is not building human hospitals. Okay, and the results are in. So who's going to come out top? So we'll see who got the most answers correct, and then who was the fastest as well. Magical Rhino. So well done, Magical Rhino. And I think it looks like a unicorn. Back to our first question. So well done, Magical Rhino. It was a close race there with Melissa Ackerman second. Thank you so much for participating. Okay, well done, everyone. Now we're just going to ask you some of your opinions. So we're really interested to know, why is wildlife important to you? So following the presentations from Dr. Goodall and the OIE staff, we're really keen to hear from you. What excites you about wildlife? What concerns you about wildlife? Or why is wildlife important in your community, with where you work, or in your own country? If you could let us know, and don't forget to press submit whenever you've got your answer. So we've got One Health first up. That's always good to consider. As I said, we do work quite closely with within the tripartite with WHO, as well as FAO, so we're working on One Health. Maintaining diversity in the environment. I think you'll be looking forward to our presentation later, more about biodiversity. Biodiversity and recreation, so that's important as well. Diversity is important for One Health. Wildlife play an integral role in our own health and existence. Conservation for biodiversity and preserving the future. I think that's one that we need to think about, for our own lives and also for future generations. For healthy and prosperous worlds. So again, looking very much at the bigger picture. Lots about biodiversity. Everyone's thinking on similar lines today. Wildlife provide ecosystem services for humans and the health of the earth. They're important for ecosystems and biodiversity. Wildlife balance the ecosystem, and wildlife is our friend. I'm very happy to hear that. Also, this is an interesting one: invisible connection and emotion feelings. So maybe it's something that's difficult to quantify or difficult to express, but I think a lot of us have that. I'm going to ask one of my colleagues, may I ask Baz or one of our interpreters to translate this one in French, talking about wildlife. Maybe one of our interpreters. I'm not even going to mangle the language.
No, it basically says that wildlife is essential for biodiversity balance.
Okay, thank you so much. Just so everyone can understand, see all the responses. Wildlife biodiversity supports the health of the biosphere. This is the first time this has been mentioned. So domestic animals, I think we will be talking again a little bit later about domestic animals and how useful they are and how they interact with wildlife. Okay, we've got, what have we got here? The animal kingdom represents more than 80% of biomass, and our livelihoods and ecosystems play an integral role in preserving health food supply in the future. I think most people have given us a response, so I'm just going to scroll down these slowly and then we'll move on to our next question. But these are all really interesting, and thank you so much for your responses to the question. Oh, we're getting longer responses here that I spent a little bit of time thinking about it and typing. Okay, for biodiversity, to the children for their dream. Again, looking at the future. Okay, thank you so much for your responses. I'm just going to move to the next question. We'll spend a couple of minutes on that. So we're here today, we're talking about meeting with people around the world. You saw from that map that we have lots of people with us today who are interested in wildlife health. Later today, there'll be another session to connect young people with the same interest. So we want to know, who will you network with next? So what will you do in the future to communicate with other people interested in wildlife, either in our webinar now, and maybe you're putting some comments in chat, or in your university or your workplace, in your own country, or even on the other side of the world. We've got a couple about research. That's certainly a good opportunity. Different geographical levels as well there. Also, let me know if you've got a cool new app that makes communication better. How do you like to communicate and network with people? Maybe you like using technology, or maybe you prefer to meet people when you're socializing or at a conference. So what have we got? We've got local conservationists, OIE Wildlife Health, big plug for us, thank you. Zoo vets, beekeepers. Nice to see that we've got bees mentioned again, regional non-governmental organisations, wildlife centres and groups, vet students. Nice to see some vet students with us today. Forest and wildlife agencies, local communities. Very important to involve local communities when we're talking about wildlife. National conservation organisations and wildlife foundations in your own country. Wildlife Conservation Agency, government agencies. Again, when we're thinking about networking, we're thinking about different people with different jobs, different roles, but also at different levels. So we've got everything from government down to local community, researchers, wildlife vets, ecologists, wildlife researchers, conservation planning specialist group, the IUCN, One Health practitioners from human medicine. If I could just ask you to mute if you have your microphone on. Thank you. We're getting a little bit of feedback. Communicating with people working on animal disease surveillance. Thank you very much. Again, local communities, regional and international organisations. Very specific one here, talking about university, ministries of forest and environment. Also, we're looking at other cross disciplines such as communication expertise. Yeah, we need to certainly have some help from lots of different experienced people to help us with experts, influencers, policymakers, organizations promoting One Health approach. Teaching to kids, yeah, let's start with the next generation. So hopefully we've got lots of young professionals here, but we'll have some even younger people as well in the future. Again, students, journalists, again talking about communication, involving general public, wildlife owner or seller, so thinking about maybe wildlife trade, publication industries, different colleagues, so networking with colleagues and also internationally through technology. If you've got any specific tips, then we're pleased to know what kind of technology you're using. Again, Baz, could I ask you for this one in French?
For the networking, one must involve everybody, veterinarians, forestry rangers, ecologists, sociologists, researchers, and the rural communities. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, lots of good answers there. I'm just going to go to the next question, trying to keep on with our time. So we have question time. If you have any specific questions, you can enter these using the Q&A button on your phone. If you include the speaker, then if the speaker's here, we can direct the question directly at them. If you submit in English, it will be a little bit quicker. My apologies, but we'll provide English to French interpretation. Let me just check. So we don't have any questions just now. The question and answer button is actually open throughout the webinar. So if you think of some questions, either from the earlier presentations or for the presentations that are coming up, then you can add those throughout. So I'll just leave the page on this question. I'll just stop sharing, and we will go back to our main room. Thank you all so much for your active participation. It's great to hear your ideas. This has been a great start to the webinar, and now I'm going to hand over to my colleague for the next part. So Dr. Patrick Bastiensten is Regional Programme Officer, and he's based at the OIE Sub-Regional Representation for Eastern Africa.
And over to Baz now, but what time is it now in Nairobi?
It's 9:10 almost. I'm actually overlooking the Nairobi National Park from where I'm sitting in my office. So everybody, bonjour, buenos dias, and of course, good morning, and welcome to this second session of the webinar. My name is Bas, as Lisa said, and I'm a program officer at the Nairobi office for East Africa. It's my honor and privilege to take you through this second session dedicated to some of the more emblematic diseases and some lesser known diseases affecting wildlife species, often as reservoir hosts or maintenance hosts, or as outright target species and victims of the disease. So why would we care, would you say? Well, the following professionals will highlight the risks to people through zoonotic spillover effects, the risks to livestock and domestic animals such as dogs, and or the risks to wildlife itself, meaning biodiversity or even the extinction of wildlife species. So I'll take this, I'll start this tour in the land of the rising sun in Tokyo, the Far East, where Dr. Hirofumi Kujita, the OIE regional representative for Asia, the Pacific, will introduce the subject and the speaker, who is Dr. Brendan Cowlett of Ausvet, a veterinary consulting firm working out of Canberra, Australia. Brendan holds a PhD in applied ecology of wild pigs, so you know what the subject of his presentation will be. This presentation will be followed, moving westwards through the time zones, by a presentation on Peste des petits ruminants, or PPR, for which the speaker will be introduced by the OIE regional representative for the Middle East, based in Beirut, Lebanon, Dr. Ghazi Yehia. Let me simply add that Professor Ahmad Al-Majali is a full professor at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in Jordan, at the Jordan University of Science and Technology, an adjunct professor with Purdue University in Indiana in the US. And then we will conclude this first part by moving even further westwards and listening to a presentation on the fight against rabies in wildlife prepared by Dr. Maxim Sârbu from the Republic of Moldova, and introduced by the OIE regional representative for the Europe region, Dr. Budimir Plavsic, who is based in Moscow in Russia. So we'll start the talk now, and I'll see you after the break for some more Mentimeter questions, so keep your Mentimeter account open and active. Let's start the videos.
I'm talking to you from Tokyo in Japan. The Asian Pacific region includes 32 OIE members with a diverse spectrum of cultures, languages, climate, environment, and of course, animals. Much of the region is designated as a biodiversity hotspot with rich aquatic and terrestrial fauna. Unfortunately, we see many threats to this great biodiversity, such as deforestation and other land use changes, and illegal and poorly regulated wildlife trade. Increased human-wildlife interactions, climate change, and antimicrobial resistance have increased emergence of zoonotic diseases and of diseases passing between livestock and wildlife. To tackle these problems, the OIE in the region is focused on two key areas: multi-sectoral collaborations using a One Health approach and networking of wildlife health stakeholders within members, sub-regions, and in the region as a whole. A serious issue affecting the Asia-Pacific region is African swine fever. Since the first report of the virus in the region in August 2018, there has been increasing concern. We have learned from experiences in Europe and are in turn now sharing our knowledge with colleagues in the Americas, where the disease has recently re-emerged. Today's webinar to celebrate World Wildlife Day is a great opportunity for us to share information between regions. In Asia and Pacific, much effort on African swine fever has focused on the domestic pig industry. However, the region contains several species of wild pigs, many of which are threatened with extinction. To ascertain the risk of African swine fever to wild pigs, the OIE set up a project in collaboration with experts in the region. I'll now hand over to Dr. Brendan Collett to discuss details of the project. Thank you.
Hello colleagues, thanks for your attention. My name is Brendan Callard. I'm a director at OSVET. OSVET's a One Health and veterinary epidemiology company. We've got a presence in Europe and in Southeast Asia and Australia. The reason I'm talking today is I have a background in wild pig management, and we recently did a project for the OIE regional office in the Asia and the Pacific on wild pigs and ASF, and I'm going to present some of the results from that project today. So I'd like to start with the general situation about African swine fever throughout the world, about African swine fever, the global situation, and the impact on conservation. So African swine fever is caused by a virus. It's a DNA virus. It's from the Aspergillosis family, and it's very resilient in the environment. It causes African swine fever in pig species. That's especially in domestic and wild Suscrofa, the common pig, but it also has impacts on wild and conservation species of wild pig. It's uncertain exactly what impact it has on all species, but it's been shown to cause disease and deaths in several species of wild pigs. But that's not the African wild pigs, because this virus originated in the continent of Africa. It has a stable cycle going on in Africa with wild pigs, so bush pigs, warthogs, etc. It has a cycle with soft ticks, and it causes no disease in those species. But occasionally that leads to spillovers into domestic pigs. That causes disease both in Africa and throughout the world. So there's been a pretty successful period of several decades from the 50s onwards when disease has spilled over into the world of it being contained and eradicated. Maybe not from parts of Italy, but it has been contained and eradicated up till now. But that changed in 2007. There's a major introduction of disease into Georgia, probably from contaminated ship waste, and it spread and established in Georgia and throughout Central Asia. From there it spread to many areas of the world, for example Europe, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and now recently the Americas. This concerns Southeast Asia though, because it spread to China, and from China it spread to the rest of the region. So it's spreading rapidly throughout Southeast Asia now, and that's what this project concentrated on, because it has a significance for conservation. Southeast Asia is really the origin of the pig, and there's many species of endemic wild pig in that area that are found nowhere else in the world, and they're all have some conservation status, either from vulnerable to critically endangered, and African swine fever has a major risk that it'll infect these species, kill large proportions of the remaining populations, and lead to further declines in their conservation status. Now to the situation in the Asia and the Pacific region. It's found widely throughout Asia now. It's found in Russian Asia, in China, India, and many countries in between. It's in Southeast Asia in at least half a dozen countries. It's spread even to the Pacific, so it's got to the Papua New Guinea, but no further. It's known to infect and kill 3 species now, domestic and feral pigs and wild boar, Suscrofa, and the bearded pig and the Philippine warty pigs. So it's spread to several species. It's unknown the impact on other species, but it's believed to be important and will cause mortalities. As to the impacts of African swine fever on the wider ecosystem health, there are two or three real impacts. First is just extinction. A lot of these species are small, not very abundant, and they're under threat already. So a African swine fever outbreak through some of these populations may lead to extinctions, or at least local extirpation of populations. And a good example is the pygmy hog in India. There's only 300 or 400 individuals left in 2 or 3 populations. If a African swine fever outbreak occurred, it could wipe out 1 or more of those populations. Of course, wild pigs, whether they be Suscrofa or other species throughout Southeast Asia, have some really important ecosystem services. For example, they provide a food source and the major food source to many predators such as Sumatran tigers or Javan leopards, for example. They are the major food source. Take away pigs and they'll either prey switch or they won't have the food resources available to recruit into their populations. They're ecosystem engineers. They, for example, affect seedling recruitment and forest regeneration, and they're very important food source and cultural source for people in the area. So wild pigs are used for cultural reasons. So removing wild pigs due to the impact of ASF could have some pretty diverse impacts on the environment and One Health. As to the solutions, there's a few solutions, but first you have to get the context right. Pigs vary throughout their range in how they're used, how they're perceived, and their abundance and ability to control them. So that first thing is context. Prevention, we can actually prevent the further spread through quarantine and border controls and preventing movement between islands throughout the archipelago nations. Detection, here we're really talking about passive surveillance, looking for dead pigs. That's the best way to pick this up. And then we've got response, and the response can be to manage ASF transmission within Suscrofa. Suscrofa are often overabundant, and here we need several steps: interagency cooperation, because it's often jurisdiction between environment or agriculture is confusing. We need better biosecurity at domestic pigs. We need to reduce wild pig densities in some areas, and that's maybe with lethal control to reduce transmission. And we need to minimise movement of products and pigs. And do we need to remove carcasses in cold areas? Yes, because that can maintain ASF virus in the environment. In terms of protecting wild pigs, we need protected populations. We need to prepare for vaccinations if they're ever developed, because this is going to be developed and then have to be used with oral baiting. And then we need to reduce ASF in domestic pigs to reduce spillover, and we need to conduct risk analysis. We need to do quarantine of these endemic species, and we need to do really good biosecurity. So they're the major solutions. I guess the major lesson for sharing would be that the way to control disease in wild pigs varies very much by context and where wild pigs are found. They're across very large areas, and there's a lot of diversity across those areas. So the solutions vary depending on the region and the country and the species. So it's complex. That concludes my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning. In the Middle East, and despite its harsh desert landscape, there is a wide variety of wildlife. Most of the wildlife are hosted in parks, zoos, and secured reserves, especially in GCC countries. Middle Eastern deserts are home to a host of animals, including gazelle, sand cats, oryx, and lizard. The parks have also an array of bird species, especially falcons, native to the Arabian Peninsula. Jackals, foxes, and boars are found in Eastern Mediterranean countries like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The region is also home to a diverse range of marine wildlife. Harmless sea creatures are often found in warm, shallow waters, making the Arabian Gulf a very suitable habitat. In most of the Middle Eastern countries, wildlife health is entrusted to the Veterinary Services Authority. Nevertheless, intersectoral collaboration is conducted with other authorities such as the Ministry of Environment, as well as the private sector is on many occasions giving support and assistance. Countries in the region have already developed regulatory frameworks to enable the veterinary service to carry on disease epidemiological surveillance and other procedures at the human-animal ecosystem interface, which are mostly integrated with the domestic animal diseases surveillance system, targeting, for instance, rabies and Ppi, our today's regional topic. Talking about PPR, as you are aware, it is an endemic disease in the Middle East, and countries of the region have already embarked in the PMAT mechanism for the eradication of the disease. Nevertheless, a regionally concerted effort to support both both national and regional actions is required to control the disease, especially in wildlife. And the animal health services entrusted with this task require support and strengthening. At the end, there is a need to increase multi-sectoral coordination, especially within the One Health approach, as promoted by international organizations, and better involvement of local community living near wildlife habitats. The OIE Wildlife Health Framework presents a good guidance for protecting wildlife health within the One Health concept. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to introduce to you Professor Ahmed Al-Majali, very well known by the majority of veterinary services in the region. He is the former dean and actual professor at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in Just, Jordan. And Professor Al-Majali has his fingerprints in many projects to the surveillance and control of transboundary animal diseases in the region. Professor Al-Majali, you have the floor.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Ahmed Al-Majali. I am from Jordan, and I am a professor of infectious diseases and epidemiology with Jordan University of Science and Technology, and currently working for the FAO SNG as consultant. Today, I'll be talking to you about a very important disease that affects domesticated and wild ruminant, which is PPR. It is a well-known fact that wildlife health and diseases are increasingly important aspect of wildlife conservation, especially for those that are at risk for extinction. It is interesting to know that about 72% of zoonotic diseases are originated in wild animals. What we really need is to do more surveillance to understand wildlife populations and to do more effective investigations regarding wildlife disease outbreaks, and to critically look for effective management for those diseases in order to save livestock, environment, wildlife, as well as human populations under the umbrella of One Health approach. Wildlife scientists are poorly equipped, and there is not much fun going to wildlife investigations. Let's come back to PPR. PPR is a major transboundary animal disease that is very important from socio-economic point of view. It is caused by a virus, Morbilli virus, which is an RNA virus, and it affects wild as well as domesticated ruminants. Most of the isolates that were reported during the last 10 years from wildlife ruminants belong to the lineage 4 of the PPR. It is worth mentioning that there are 4 lineages of PPR. All wild ruminants are susceptible to PPR. The clinical and pathological findings are similar to those seen in domesticated goats, such as mucopurulent nasal discharges, pneumonia clinical signs, ulcerative keratitis along with conjunctivitis. Young animals might be found dead, high mortalities in young animals. From pathological point of view, you're going to see pinpoint grayish areas of necrosis in the buccal cavity, The gastrointestinal tract will be hemorrhagic, congested, especially in the abomasum, and you will see erosions and congestions forming lines, or what we call stripings, or the zebra stripings. The lungs might be affected, as I said, and if they are, you will see consolidated lungs. The picture here shows some of the clinical signs, which is the mucopurulent nasal discharges as well as the keratoconjunctivitis. The pictures below show the inclusion bodies in microscopic picture or microscopic sections of the intestine. In this slide, we see more clinical and pathological findings associated with Pbi virus, the mucopurulent nasal discharge, the erosions in the buccal cavity, and on the right we see the zebra stripes in the picture, in the pictures below, as well as the consolidated lungs and some of the lesions that you see in the mouth. When it comes to spreading, Pbi are mainly spread by close contact between infected animals. The virus is shed in all secretions almost and excretions of infected animals. Aerosol transmission of PPR is also possible. Animals are considered infectious during the incubation period, which lasts from 2 days to 10 days. It is important to remember that carriers are not developed due to PPR infection. In this slide again, we see the distribution of PPR. We see that mostly Africa and Asia are endemic with PPR. All the Middle East region are endemic with PPR, and they are participating in the PPR global control eradication strategy, which rank them from 1 to 4. And we see that all countries are either in 1 or 2 levels of the PCP PPR basically ranking. In this slide, we see the distribution of PPR in wildlife, and we see that during the period between 2005 to 2019, only 34 countries reported PPR virus in it, only few from the Middle East region. Those that reported basically PPR in wildlife, they reported either virus detection by genetic methodology or mostly by serology. And this exactly reflects the fact that the interface between livestock and wild ruminants is very important when it comes to the epidemiology of PPR in wildlife. And we see that most of the countries that reported PPR in wildlife, they have reported PPR in domesticated animals. In the Middle East, United Arab Emirates, Iran, and the occupied Palestinian territory, as well as Saudi Arabia, are the ones that literatures or data of OIE shows that they have reported PPR in wildlife. And mostly those were in antelopes or in reem gazelles, Arabian mountain gazelles, springbuck, Nubian ibex, Barbary sheep, or the fallow deer in Iran, mountain gazelle, Nubian ibex, and wild boars, as well as fallow deer in the occupied territories in Saudi Arabia. The species is not available. However, the area that was affected during 2009, they have reported a few cases in Tabuk area, and it was basically in wildlife, but they did not show what type of wildlife. As of the effect of wildlife PPR on the basically ecosystem health and biodiversity, it is very well known that PPR outbreaks resulting in severe mortalities and eventually threaten the wildlife population and ecosystem stability. And basically all the research, or most of the research done, suggests that the spillover at the wildlife livestock interface is very important in the epidemiology, but we needed more work in order to elucidate other factors. And the expansion of PPR into free-ranging wildlife negatively impacted biodiversity and reduces the vision of PPR-free world, which was announced by the OIE and FAO, which expected to happen in year 2030. And the current surveillance for wildlife diseases usually targets diseases that affect humans only, or that have zoonotic importance, but basically less information or less funds going towards studying other diseases that affect livestock population per se, such as PPR. In order to eradicate PPR in wildlife, we need to incorporate the wildlife basically in the global strategy that is meant for controlling PPR, which consists of 4 components. We need to do modifications on those components by engaging wildlife and veterinary agencies in the PPR eradication at the wildlife-livestock interface. And we need to support wildlife diagnostics by finding all diagnostic tools in the wildlife and wildlife scientists. We need to integrate Pbi virus control efforts and targeting more vaccination for livestock, basically, which will help in preventing spillovers to the wildlife. And we need to find new methods for basically vaccinating wildlife if possible. And finally, we need to coordinate and manage between the different agencies, different countries, to incorporate wildlife in their control strategies for PPR. Thank you very much for listening.
Dear colleagues, dear students, it is my great pleasure to welcome you on this important webinar on behalf of the OIE teams from Europe. We think that this unique webinar on global wildlife health will bring an excellent opportunity to share the knowledge and to share best practices, how to reduce and how to manage the risk of transmission of the zoonotic viruses and other pathogens at human-animal ecosystem interface, and also to see how is the better way to develop the system for early detection, notification, and management of animal disease to cover also wildlife diseases. As we know, wild animals are essential to maintain ecosystem and health of all living organisms, but they are under serious pressure of climate change, global warming, a destruction of their natural habitats with lack of clean water and air, all caused mainly by humans. And that is why veterinary profession must contribute to the protection of wild animals and their health by development of strong and efficient animal disease control system based on OIE standards. We trust this is achievable, and we have examples of effective control of zoonotic animal disease in wild animals. Rabies is one of them, and in Europe we have excellent examples of rabies virus elimination in more than half of our member countries who implement oral rabies vaccination with strong general, also called passive surveillance system. In other countries in our region, veterinary services in partnership with other authorities implement activities related to the dog-mediated rabies elimination before 2030. Now it is my great pleasure to announce and to invite a colleague of mine, Dr. Maxim Silbu, from National Veterinary and Food Safety Authority in the Republic of Moldova, who is also a focal point for disease notification and also national coordinator responsible for implementation of program of oral rabies vaccination of wild carnivores in Moldova. Maxim, let's learn from your experience. The floor is yours.
Zoonosis of virotic origin that has the highest lethality rate in both animals and humans infected with the rabies virus. Notification of the incidence of disease annually come from the more than 150 countries around the world, and the number of deaths due to rabies is over 50,000 people annually. At the same time, the number of people vaccinated due to bites caused by sick or suspected animals infected with rabies virus exceeds 15 million of persons every year. The rabies virus particularly affects of central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. It occurs rarely in vaccinated pet, but can be easily contracted with an unvaccinated pet comes in contact with other sick or wild animal and is bitten or scratched by it. Humans can be contaminated by bites produced from both contaminated domestic and wild animals. The main reservoir of rabies virus in the wildlife in the Europe region being mainly represented by the red fox. Contaminated foxes, depending on the stage of disease, change their behavior. The lack of fur, which is characteristic of wild animals, is one of the most common behavioral changes that can be noted consequently. Foxes enter in localities and in animals' shelters during the day and allow humans to approach them. Moreover, without becoming aggressive, they bite animals and humans and have a fixed gaze, sometimes with insecure gait followed by paralysis and death. Another important sources of the disease, as well as a potential reservoir of virus, represent the stray dogs in urban areas that bite humans and various species of animals. However, the measures taken to reduce their number and expose them to prophylactic vaccination are involving slow and require additional financing sources. Given the important social and economic impact of rabies, the disease is constantly monitored by the veterinary service and it's being included in the plan of the strategic veterinary measures in the country, which provides concrete measures regarding surveillance, prevention and control of the disease in susceptible animals and assure the population protection from contamination. Situation of rabies on example of Republic of Moldova. Republic of Moldova is one of the countries in the Europe countries region which has a comparatively high number of rabies cases. From 1952 of present, rabies remains an endemic zoonosis in the territory of Republic of Moldova, with a different incidence disease having higher frequency in wild animals, mainly represented by the red fox. The data gathered from the laboratory results obtained in the period 2010 or 2020 was used to analyze the role of wildlife, especially red foxes, in maintaining and spreading cases of rabies in domestic animals. The highest peak of rabies cases in foxes was recorded in the years 2010, 2012, 2014, 2015. To speak about the geographical spread of rabies in the territory of Republic of Moldova, the quantity of red foxes in the territory of Republic of Moldova is over than 7 times from the norm. Analyzing the geographical spread of rabies on the territory of Republic of Moldova, it can be seen that outbreaks of rabies were widespread in all geographical areas of Republic. However, an increased concentration of cases can be seen in the northern and central part of Republic, where the surface of forest strips is higher. At the same time, at the anti-rabies offices of Republic, on average, less than 2,000 people that had contact with suspected or suffering from rabies animals were bitten by stray dogs, cats, wild animals, or rodents, or were vaccinated. If speaking about the rabies cases in humans, we had in 2003, 2016, and 2019 rabies cases in humans. Speaking about the solution, first of all, I want to speak about vaccination and information of population. And of course, we need to speak about the program what was launched in 2020 in Republic of Moldova It's a bilateral program with Romania, which aimed to vaccinate wildlife animals against rabies by the combined method, manual and by the plain vaccination of foxes. The main aspects of rabies prophylaxis are focused on applying general prophylaxis measures and providing prophylactic vaccination of receptive animals, actions that allow the category of dogs and cats in rural localities, identification of rabies cases, permanent control of health status of domestic and wild animals, and of course vaccination, application of different kinds of vaccinations. What we could speak about the lessons. First of all, it's a vaccination and the information of the population. If to speaking about the European region, we could see that the rabies evolution is dredging evolution. The most frequent cases of disease in the European region were registered in red foxes. And if looking about the results of the programs of vaccination of wild animals, it's very high reduction of rabies cases in animals after the first 2-3 years of vaccination with combination of manual and plain distribution of vaccine. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So these were 3 diseases, African swine fever, PPR, and rabies, all very important diseases for wildlife, for other mammals, livestock, and in the last case, of course, also for people. We will now take a 10-minute break, allowing you to have a coffee or a tea or a Red Bull. And meanwhile, please continue asking questions. So the Q&A session remains open. And we also have a specific question for you in the Mentimeter, which is, how will you support ecosystem restoration? So while you are having this break, please try to formulate how best you could or would support ecosystem restoration. We're really interested in your opinion. You can, of course, also continue to ask questions through the chat box or through the YouTube live stream. And I will see you in 10 minutes.
Wildlife makes an essential contribution to our life support system.
For example, for local communities who live at the interface with wildlife, this is a main source of proteins.
Without bees, we wouldn't have fruit.
Bats are actually pollinators. They are seed dispersers, and if tomorrow bats are gone, that will affect human health and their domestic animal health. an emerging disease emerging from wildlife, which is called the Nipah virus. It appeared in Asia a few years ago. There was a lot of deforestation to plant palm trees. The thousands of bats had to go elsewhere to feed themselves. So they get closer to human settlements, and particularly closer to pig farms, where there were mango trees and where they could feed. They were carrier of this Nipah virus that eventually were transmitted to the pigs who got sick, and then the pigs contaminated the humans.
The virus that causes COVID-19 almost certainly came from wildlife.
And to reduce the risk of emerging disease and prevent the next pandemic, we need to better understand the origin and drivers. Human activities are the main factors increasing the emergence of disease from wildlife.
Deforestation is one of them, and also the exploitation of natural resources in forests where human beings are not used to go.
Because we have more contact between wildlife, domestic animals and humans.
One factor that's thought to be related to the emergence of disease from wildlife is the unregulated trade in wildlife. And we still don't understand wildlife supply chains in many parts of the world. So a lot of work needs to be done to understand where those risks are.
Because we share the ecosystem with wildlife and domestic animals, our health is intrinsically linked to the health of animals and the environment.
Animals and humans, they live within the ecosystem, so it's important that the environment is put at the center of the discussion.
People need to be aware of the value of wildlife as assets and the important role that they play in maintaining health of individuals, health of society.
To improve wildlife health is to improve the health of all, environment, animals and humans.
The OIE has been developing a wildlife health framework to better integrate wildlife health in its core activities.
And it really builds on OIE's existing platforms, tools, mechanisms.
Our members can report incidents on the wildlife disease outbreaks directly on our platform. This information is shared with the international communities, so earlier action can be taken.
This framework aims to protect wildlife health to better achieve One Health. The COVID-19 pandemic is not the first pandemic that humanity is facing, and is not going to be the last one.
If we do nothing for wildlife health and for biodiversity, we will have more and more pandemic events like the one we have with the COVID-19.
We need to act now because we have everyone's attention, and people are starting to understand the importance of wildlife health in preventing disease emergence at the human-animal interface.
So I hope you're all back from your sanitary break or your coffee break. Answers to the question on restoration are coming in, as you can see. Planting trees, I see. I assume people from the Ministry of Agriculture who feel they should work closer with the Ministry of Ecology. Community involvement, of course, essential. Call out resource extractive activities such as mining. Recycling projects, absolutely. Somebody roping in antimicrobial resistance problems in sewage or in water system, bee relocations. So 19 participants have contributed so far. Increase awareness, of course. Not allowing further fragmentation of rangelands. Intersectoral collaboration. All very nice contributions, and we'll exploit this after the webinar today. Right, in the interest of time, I think we'll proceed with the rest of our little globe-trotting. We'll continue moving westwards and quite a bit southwards as well. Actually to my hometown of Nairobi, Kenya, on the equator, where we will be learning how anthrax can affect people, livestock and wildlife. The subject will be introduced by Dr. Augusta Kivunzia, a Kenyan veterinarian who is part of numerous joint investigations. Okay, thank you, Noel. A veterinarian who has been part of numerous joint investigation teams investigating outbreaks of anthrax in villages across Kenya. This is unfortunately a very common event in East Africa to this day. Augusta and the subject of anthrax will be introduced by the OIE regional representative for Africa based in Bamako, Mali, Dr. Karim Tunkara. And then we'll finish our globe-trotting going even further westwards to Central America, where from the OIE representation in Panama City, Dr. Katia Martinez-Rivas will introduce the last disease and the last speaker, being white nose syndrome in bats, and Dr. Jordi Segers from the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative in Halifax. Jordi is the National White Nose Syndrome and Bat Health Program Coordinator, and in this capacity he works with a multidisciplinary interagency network of wildlife health experts, researchers, decision makers, and industry. So please run the video, thank you.
Africa is a continent endowed with a high diversity of wildlife, many of which are emblematic large land mammals, encompassing carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, but also marine life and others, existing under different types of ecosystems according to individual species adaptation and the availability of foods. The ecosystem covers savanna, grasslands, plains, and forests, desert and semi-desert, mountain environment, coastal environment, etc. Every ecosystem is shaped by prevailing climatic and environmental factors. Encroachment of natural habitats through human activity and global warming present the two most important threats to these ecosystems and by extension, the diverse wildlife population of Africa. Although considered natural regulators of wildlife numbers, diseases also present a formidable threat to wildlife. A case in point is anthrax, which annually decimates populations of terrestrial herbivores in Africa, such as buffalo, impala, elephants, hippos, and others. The choice of the term anthrax is therefore not fortuitous. Indeed,
anthrax, an acute bacterial disease primarily of herbivorous animals, livestock, but also wildlife, is transmissible to humans and is often lethal. The transmission occurs in a contaminated environment, making the disease a textbook example of a disease requiring a One Health approach to control it. Without any further ado, I invite Augusta Kivunzia to make her presentation. Dr. Kivunzia is a veterinarian working for veterinary services of Kitui County in Kenya in East Africa. She has taken part in many so-called joint investigation teams investigating cases of anthrax, usually detected when villagers end up in hospital after consuming animals that likely died from anthrax. Her experience in dealing with such complex disease epidemiology is the result of her time working for the Zoonotic Disease Unit of the Joint Ministries of Health and Agriculture in Kenya between 2016 and 2019. Dear Augusta, karibu sana. The floor is yours. Thank you.
My name is Augusta Kivunzia. This is surveillance officer working for Kitui County Government, Kenya, and Africa. I'm presenting to you anthrax in wildlife in Africa. Anthrax is a soil-borne disease caused by spore-forming bacteria, that is Bacillus cereus bivalve anthracis and Bacillus anthracis, causing periodic and localized outbreaks in wildlife and domestic livestock, sometimes with spillover to people, leading most often to cutaneous anthrax and sometimes to pulmonary and gastrointestinal form of anthrax. Most of the wildlife in Africa lives in the savanna ecosystem. In this area, animals interact with wildlife and they pose a risk of transmission of diseases among the livestock and wildlife animals. And therefore, spillover to people result from butchering and consumption of wild and domestic animals that have died or are deceased from anthrax. Unfortunately, anthrax is not easily detected in wildlife, and therefore people and livestock often serve as sentinels for disease surveillance in wildlife. Anthrax is one of the oldest diseases in animals in Africa, quoted in the Bible in Egypt in 1491 for Christ. Genotyping studies suggest that anthrax origin to be sub-Saharan Africa with spread to the rest of the world. Earliest records of anthrax in wildlife in Africa are dated back to over 150 years ago, affecting herbivores, and outbreaks mostly occurring during the dry season. Anthrax is recorded to be occurring in more than 12 countries in Africa, most cases being reported in southern part of Africa, then the eastern part of Africa, some parts of West Africa, and Central Africa. However, this is likely underreported. Anthrax recur in areas where it had happened before. For example, in Uganda, Queen Elizabeth, 1959 and 1960, there was an outbreak, which recurred in 1961, again in 2004, 2005, and 2010. In Zambia, anthrax occurred in wildlife in 1987 and again in 1989. In Kenya, anthrax occurred in Lake Nakuru National Park in 2015 and again in 2017, the same area. In Namibia, 1998 and 1989, there were outbreaks which occurred in the same place, that is Etosha National Park. Anthrax has been affecting different species in the wildlife, but most of the animals which are being hit most are the herbivores, especially the hippos, buffaloes, elephants, zebras, the kudus, among others. Most of these species, herbivores, have been recorded in South Africa, where 68% of the deaths were because of kudus. And this was in the southern part of Africa. In the eastern part of Africa, 90% of herbivores have been said to be the animals which have died from anthrax. In Kenya, from studies done to review outbreaks in wildlife for the last 18 years. In West Africa and Central Africa, anthrax has been affecting chimpanzees, wild chimpanzees, and gorillas. Anthrax outbreaks in wildlife threaten extinction of endangered species, especially for example, great apes in West Africa. They also reduce the number of wildlife, and this makes them more vulnerable, and they become also threatened to extinction with time. It also disrupts food chain in the wildlife, and this may lead to wildlife-human conflict, especially when wildlife encroach human settlements. When carcasses are opened, either by human or by vultures, they contaminate the environment, the water bodies, and the vegetation, as well as the soil. And this becomes the hotspots for future outbreaks in that area. When this anthrax spills over to human, it may cause deaths to human, as well as increase the cost due to treatment. Some of the diseases which harbor in the wildlife, when these wildlife die, these diseases may start affecting other livestock and human, causing emerging and re-emerging diseases. It is expensive to control outbreaks in the wildlife and also in the livestock. And therefore, this leads to huge economic losses, fear of tourists visiting such national parks, and also threaten livelihood for people who depend on wildlife for survival. Surveillance, reporting systems, and outbreak response are very important in control of anthrax. This will help in detecting the disease early in advance before it is spilled over to the human and livestock. Coordination and collaboration in the local, national, and the regional will help in control of the disease in a holistic way, because it is a disease which affects the environment, the wildlife, and the livestock. Education campaigns will increase the awareness of anthrax. Anthrax vaccines are important in vaccination of susceptible livestock, as well as endangered species, and prevent them from being extinct due to this disease. Research helps to determine the ecological risk factors, as well as come up with hotspot maps and risk maps of occurrences. And these areas will help in determining and surveillance of anthrax to ensure that the anthrax is detected early enough before it spills over. This data from research can also be used to come up with the policies which will help better management of wildlife and prevention of wildlife from diseases. Advocacy for resource mobilization, especially from the political class, to ensure that enough funding is allocated to wildlife and disease control. Africa Anthrax Network are important because it helps to come up with a unified way of controlling anthrax in the region. Diagnostics and laboratory capacity to isolate and characterize the disease-causing agents and be able to know which pathogen is causing which disease where. Some of the shared lessons are that One Health approach to surveillance gives better data and improved response. Early warning systems using real data reporting will help to prevent spillover of the disease to people. Regional coordinated anthrax network should be considered in order to bridge the gap and address and reporting. Control of anthrax involves breaking the anthrax cycle of infection through vaccination of livestock, endangered species, destruction of carcasses, and decontamination of the environment. Anthrax outbreaks range from sporadic to high mortality epizootics, with no consistency in space and time, especially in the naive population. And anthrax drivers are complex, ranging from climate, soil conditions, animal community structure, socio-cultural behavior, tradition, poverty, and food security, as well as animal movements. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Katia Martinez, OIE Subregional Representative for Central America. Wildlife health deserves attention and investment. People and animals share the same ecosystem, which is why public health, animal health, and ecosystem health are closely linked. An example of this are bats, animals that they are often considered carriers of deadly viruses, are the fundamental species for ecosystems around the world for their work as seed dispersers, pollinators, or insect population controllers. Declines in bat populations as a result of deadly pathogens or other factors could have a major ecological, socioeconomic, and health impact across the globe. In this regards, I am pleased to welcome our next speakers, Dr. Jordi Seegers, coordinator of Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative National Program on White Nose Syndromes and Bats Health. Dr. Seegers will share with us a presentation on white nose syndromes in bats, a fungal disease that affects entire colonies, reducing their populations and affecting the ecosystem role of bats. We hope that the experience shared in this presentation and in this global seminar will help you learn more about current wildlife issues and how different countries are addressing this. At the same time, we hope that you will be able to connect and exchange knowledge with colleagues from other regions to continue to deepen this important topic for the OIE and our members. Dr. Seegers, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Jordi Seegers. I am with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, and I'm the National Bat Health Scientific Program Coordinator. Bats are incredibly important to ecosystems around the world, where they provide ecosystem services such as insect control, pollination, and seed dispersal. And most of all the 1,400 plus bat species around the world are insectivores, as are nearly all of the 49 bat species living in Canada and the United States. And by controlling insect populations, bats not only provide a service to the ecosystem, but they directly contribute to our economical and personal health as well. Bats provide billions of dollars worth in pest control to the agricultural industries by consuming large amounts of insects that damage crops such as corn, potato, and cotton. Insectivorous bats in temperate climates of Canada and the United States either migrate south or hibernate more locally to survive winter when insect food is not available. White nose syndrome is a fungal disease of hibernating bats in North America. The fungus responsible for causing this disease is called Pseudogymnoascus destructans. This fungus was likely accidentally introduced from Europe by people. And while European bats seem to have an evolutionary advantage, that of natural immunity to the effects of the fungus, unfortunately, many North American bats do not have this immunity. The fungus attacks the skin tissue of these bats while they're hibernating and while their immune systems are suppressed. And in particular, it damages the wings, which in turn causes bats to dehydrate more rapidly, which requires them to arouse from hibernation and burn valuable fat reserves in order to find water. So due to this increased activity in winter, many bats perish by running out of their limited energy reserves. White nose syndrome was first discovered in New York State in 2006, and through targeted wildlife health surveillance, it was observed spreading about 200 to 250 kilometers every year. And this is primarily facilitated by bats because of their nature of flying to different hibernation sites during their fall mating season. So the first winter, often only the white fluffy fungus is observed growing on bats, ears, wings, and nose, hence its given name, white nose syndrome. But in subsequent years, hibernating bat populations numbers usually plummet. So typically we're seeing 90% declines of bat populations over only 2 or 3 years, and sometimes even more than that. In 2011, about 5 years after white nose syndrome was first discovered, it was estimated that anywhere from 5.7 to 6.7 million bats had died from this disease. But more recent estimates, updated estimates, are still pending. And while white nose syndrome began as a disease among hibernating bats in the east of the continent, it has now spread to 37 US states and 7 Canadian provinces, and is affecting at least 12 different bat species in eastern and central Canada and the United States, as well as now also southern and even western United States. This rapid geographic spread and the severe populations declines caused by white nose syndrome among several species have resulted in multiple bat species being federally or regionally listed on Species at Risk Acts. In both Canada and the US, several bat species are either listed as endangered, threatened, or they're currently undergoing species status assessment. So there is a real risk of extirpation or even extinction of these species, but what would this really mean for our ecosystems? Well, we know that North American bats consume a lot of insects, roughly half their body weight per night, and we know that we have lost a lot of bats due to white nose syndrome. So cascading effects on insect communities and beyond are inevitable. So with ecosystems being as interconnected as they are, it's actually really hard to understand these cascading effects. However, it can be expected that other insectivorous animals, like some fish, insects, and bird species, may actually increase in populations to fill the niche left by the declining bat populations. And in turn, this changes the abundance and composition of those species predators, and the cascading effect of all of that can have significant effects on the ecosystem as a whole. In the agricultural sector, some preliminary data suggest that there's an increase in the use of insecticides in areas after the arrival of white nose syndrome. And the increased use of such toxic substances can negatively impact both our natural world and our human health. And while bats do eat mosquitoes, studies have shown that the impact on mosquito populations is highly variable among different regions, and that typically such insects as mosquitoes are eaten more opportunistically by bats. However, the loss of millions of bats would certainly have the potential to decrease the control of mosquito populations. And mosquitoes are significant disease factors, so that would impact our human health as well. But really more research on ecosystem-wide effects are needed to allow us to better understand and predict how the loss of bats is really changing our world. So the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative coordinates Canada's National White Nose Syndrome and Bat Health Program, and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service coordinates the US White Nose Syndrome Program. And such national coordination programs with strong international collaboration help to bring available resources together and provide situational awareness among stakeholders, including wildlife managers with a mandate for wildlife health. So we build partnership, we share knowledge, we put resources in place so that bat health monitoring and assessment can be done. And I'm talking about bat health here because, well, white nose syndrome mitigation alone is not enough. There's really only so much that we can do. Through decontamination protocols and procedures, we are limiting the spread of this fungal disease caused by people, but we can't really halt the spread, this now natural spread that's occurring by bats. So really, to curb potential extinction of these bats, a holistic approach in bat health management is essential. So we collaborate with partners to identify, protect, and enhance critical habitat, and we facilitate efforts to develop best management practices for industry partners such as wind energy, pest control operators, forestry, and mining industry, and so on, so that remnant bat populations are managed with population health in mind. So this is really where we can make a difference for bat health, not so much in saving them directly from the disease white nose syndrome, but those bats that seem to somehow survive naturally, protect them by designating critical habitat and protecting other habitats that these bats need to hibernate, to forage, to drink, and to roost in and to raise their babies and therefore reproduce. So early detection of wildlife health issues is imperative to allow wildlife managers to initiate an early response. White nose syndrome kind of caught us all by surprise, but we did learn valuable lessons about the ongoing risk of pathogen transmission between continents and species, and the importance of decontamination protocols, as I mentioned before, and other best management guidance, as well as the importance of mitigating threats other than diseases, because wildlife health is not simply the absence of disease. Health goes much deeper than that. It considers the interaction of biological, social, and environmental factors that may impact at-risk populations, because wildlife health is influenced by the cumulative effects of multiple stressors or threats. So there are many parts to managing endangered species that are facing not only devastating diseases, but whose populations are under pressure from many other factors impacting their health. And we can't forget about those factors, and we need to address those impacts. So having nationally coordinated response programs in place is key to making sure everybody working towards the same goals, the goals of preventing species extinction and ensuring recovery of impacted species, that we can research and manage wildlife as effectively and efficiently as possible, of course, before species go extinct, so that we can help these species thrive and help us maintain important ecosystem balances. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any further questions or you'd like to chat about white nose syndrome or bat health, I'd be happy to chat with you. So contact me at this email address. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. So this concludes our trip of the globe, where we started in Japan and Australia and ended in Panama City and Halifax, Canada. I hope you found this interesting. We covered 5 diseases, and I believe in the next, before we move to the next closing or final session, I will ask Maria Eugenia to share some quiz questions with us. So please move back to your Mentimeter account, and we'll just present you with a few follow-up questions on these 5 diseases. Eugenia, what time is it? I can only imagine how early it is in Buenos Aires.
Don't need to imagine, it's 4:21 a.m. here in Buenos Aires.
That's even too early for breakfast. Okay, well, you look good for the time of the day. And please take over.
Thank you, Bas. Well, before we continue with the next session, we're gonna go through the Mentimeter questions to share with you. Please do not hesitate to write the questions during the whole webinar. And for the first question, Lesa, we can go quiz time. Are you ready? Hope you're more awake than I am, because the question is on. So, can African swine fever kill Philippine water pigs? Yes or no? To remember that African swine fever affects wildlife species as well as domestic pigs. So the answer is, I'm seeing some spoiler alerts in the chat. Yes. Everyone was paying attention, great. For the second question, as you might notice, is one question for each regional presentation. Is Pet de Petit Rumina spread by vectors? Is it? Is it spread by vectors? What do you think? I've seen some divided questions. Time's up. Yes, it was close. It was a close one. I think we should see the YouTube video to rehearse that presentation. For the next question now. Coming. In Europe, are red foxes the main rabies reservoir? Like nice microscopic picture of the neuron. 10 seconds to go. Are in Europe red foxes the main rabies reservoir? Time's up. Yes, no doubt about it. And now for the question for the next presentation is it is anthrax a telluric disease? We have 10 seconds to go. It is anthrax a telluric disease. It was a very nice presentation from Africa region. It would made it very clear. Time's up. Yes, it was kind of close, but it is a telluric disease. So the next question, are you ready? Type fast. Do pest controllers in agriculture fight bats? This is for the Americas presentation. Do pest controllers in agriculture fight bats? 5 seconds to go. Ready? Time's up. Oh, well, it was a close one. They don't fight bats. They work together, controlling insects. Okay, so that's magical rhino lost the first place and now skips. Oh, still moving. Skips is winning these leads. Thank you very much. Thank you for participating. Great. So for the next session, is the last session of the day, of the session 1, is the ecosystem health and biodiversity. Well, as Bas already introduced me, my name is Maria Eugenia Chimenti. I'm a veterinarian and I work as a technical assistant at the OIE regional representation for the Americas. And as you know, ecosystems are only as healthy as the wildlife that lives within them. The survival of humans, animals, or plants depends on their ecosystem. Bats and bears as essential pollinators, small mammals maintain the soil health, and coral reefs produce oxygen and capture carbon. Fruit eaters disperse seeds, and predators help control the population of other species. As you know, everything is interconnected. So for the next presentation, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marcela Huarte. Marcela is an Argentine veterinarian working at the Wildlife Health Center of UC Davis. For the last 27 years, she has focused on free-ranging wildlife research and conservation in Latin America and promoted local capacity building. Marcela is member of the OIE Working Group of Wildlife, and she's based in Patagonia, Argentina. We're ready for Marcela. Thank you very much.
So hello everyone, I'll be discussing the importance of biodiversity for ecosystem health. I'll be presenting a few case studies that will highlight that biodiversity is essential for a healthy environment, which is in turn essential for the health of people. I'll show that the health of humans, wildlife, and the environment are interconnected, how we can have impacts on the environment that upset natural balances that alter the function of ecosystems, and how biodiversity declines can have substantial consequences on ecosystem services, but also on food production and food security. So what happens when we lose species? You have heard about white nose syndrome and its immense impact on North American bats. Losing bats is a huge problem because they play key ecosystem roles. For example, they control insects, which can both be agricultural pests and vectors of disease. They are essential pollinators of many plants we eat, and they disperse seeds that sustain forests, particularly in the tropics. Without bats dispersing seeds and pollinating, we would lose half of all trees in tropical forests. Bats are also key allies for agriculture, including for wine growers. In this recent study in Chile, it was shown that bats reduce damage to grapes and significantly increase revenue per hectare for the farmers. In North America, the value of pest control and associated reduction in the use of pesticides for crops that is provided by bats has been estimated at about $53 billion per year. But not only terrestrial biodiversity matters. In the photo on the left, you can see a bloom of phytoplankton in the ocean off the coast of Patagonia where I live. Like land plants, these microscopic organisms that live in water use photosynthesis to consume carbon dioxide and release oxygen. While we recognize the relevance of forests to provide us with oxygen and regulate climate, we rarely acknowledge that nearly half of those services come from these tiny organisms in the sea. Many of you also know that wildlife are sentinels for larger environmental problems, particularly those that can have human impacts. If we're watching, they provide key early warnings that allow us to prepare for and respond to disease outbreaks and hopefully prevent human illness and death. For example, neotropical primates are well-established sentinels for yellow fever outbreaks in South America, and primate deaths have warned of Ebola outbreaks in Central Africa. A common challenge is biodiversity conservation at the wildlife-livestock interface. The case study I share here relates to an outbreak of sarcoptic mange that was linked to a government livestock incentive program that introduced domestic llama into a hotspot for native camelid conservation in Argentina. The outcome was the local extinction of the native species from this outbreak. But beyond this, the risk of disease transmission in both directions that must always be addressed, the most important lesson learned from this case is the need to have the agriculture and the conservation sectors talk to each other and coordinate efforts so there are no such unintended consequences. The loss of native species in a landscape usually has cascading trophic impacts, leading to ecosystem imbalances, but also leading to renewed conflict and threats to wildlife. In this case, the loss of the main prey, which are the native camelid, for both predators like the puma and the scavengers like condors, means that these species now must forage outside the park, leading to new problems such as conflict with livestock or wildlife poisoning. Likewise, the extinction of wild wolves in Japan early on in the 20th century led to increases in populations of species like deer and wild boar that have now created a major problem for forest, agriculture, and the environment overall. The problem is so big that farmers have resorted to using robots that look like wolf to deter these pests and are considering the reintroduction of wolves to restore the ecosystem. In the veterinary profession, we rely on the use of pharmaceuticals. However, sometimes these can have unintended consequences. So many of you may know of the massive die-offs of vultures caused by the use of diclofenac in livestock, particularly in parts of Asia. Again, the cascading impacts of the loss of these environmental cleaners was dramatic, leading to increases in disease burden, particularly human rabies, from exploding populations of feral dogs that had access to massive abundance of food from remaining livestock carcasses. Fortunately for the vultures and for us all, this is a case in which action and regulations have started to yield some positive results. There is hope that where diclofenac has been banned, vulture populations may recover. The veterinary profession has also stepped in to try replacement drugs for diclofenac, and it seems like dolfamanic acid may be a safe option. This is a good reminder of the need for a One Health approach in our profession to prevent unintended consequences. Normally, we wouldn't promote wildlife conservation actions based on hands-on interventions on individual animals instead of wild populations. But in the case of gorillas, this is exactly the type of action that has saved them and the habitats they use. Here on this photo are veterinarians providing medical care to individual gorillas that are habituated for ecotourism. On the graph on the right, we can see that gorillas that are treated have higher greater survival probabilities. So why is this important? Well, because gorillas are the umbrella species under which many others are protected. The reason this system works is because gorilla tourism brings huge economical revenues to the countries such as Uganda and Rwanda. Thus, conservation makes financial and social sense and gains traction from government and citizen sectors. You can see here how gorilla habitat is surrounded by farms and human settlements within some of the most densely populated areas in Africa. Gorilla habitat clearly wouldn't be preserved if the government and neighboring communities weren't benefiting directly from gorilla protection. To wrap up, I wanted to share a real success story in which the outcome of prevention has been measured and recognized as a success. This is about the strategy implemented in North America to prevent the introduction of BSAL, a fungal disease related to amphibian chytridiomycosis that affects salamanders. The tools used are traditional in our veterinary toolkit. This is a risk-based approach that was focused on prevention that included temporary bans on imports and large-scale surveillance, and all was coordinated by a task force that had key representation from all the relevant stakeholders. These maps show original risk estimates of BSAL introduction on the left versus the estimated risk after the implementation of the plan over a period of 5 years between 2010 and 2015 on the right. The purple circles show some areas where the highest risk has changed to a lower risk category or disappeared. From our training as vets, we know that these approaches should work, and it is wonderful to see that they effectively do when they are correctly and timely implemented. To put things into perspective, however, we should keep in mind that today, we people and our domesticated animals account for 96% of the total biomass of the earth. Yet we expect a lot of services from the small percent of wildlife that remain. In closing, I hope I made the case that biodiversity is important for ecosystem health. As veterinarians, we need to protect and advocate for healthy wildlife populations and recognize the intrinsic value of biodiversity. We also need to remember that having robust national animal health programs that incorporate wildlife is one of the main ways to manage wildlife health risk and ensure biodiversity conservation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Marcela, for your presentation. And now we're going to go back to Mentimeter to review some of the comments your participants have shared with us. So your opinions are really valuable for us, and it helps us improve each webinar. And well, he's named a key issue related to wildlife health worldwide. Waiting for the answers. So the answers are appearing. I'm gonna read out loud a few of them, and then we're gonna move forward for the sake of time. Climate change, migratory species, networking, habitat loss, human activities. Okay, impact on conservation, environmental shift. We can add environmental fragmentation, habitat loss. Well, networking is very important to avoid everything, all the stated above, or to reduce the risk of that happening. Lack of investment, yes. Stakeholders. Not enough capacity to migrate risk, lack of validated diagnosis, climate changes, activité humaine, human activities. I think we got an idea. Maybe we can switch to the next one. So what do you think is the next step for a healthy, biodiverse world? It's like words that we can put into actions. Please remember that. What is the next step for a healthy, biodiverse world? So let's see answers coming. What do you think would be the next step? I can give you a clue. The title of the webinar that brought us together today. Okay, I'm going to start reading. Community awareness and participation. Cut down our unsustainable consumption. Everyone makes a change. Reduce human activities. More research into human activities on animal populations and migratory patterns. Conservation. Let's see. Equilibrium between organisms. To coordinate, exercise biological control, fewer pesticides, recycling. We've learned earlier today that most of wildlife species contribute on reducing pesticide by controlling insects like bats. L'application de l'approche One Health avec toutes les couches socio-professionnelles. If I understood that correctly, it's like the application of the One Health approach. I don't know.
With all layers, all social professional layers.
Within the all social professional layers, that's right on point. Be concerned about environmental concerns. We know that human-animal ecosystem interface is interconnected and cannot be addressed separately. That's one of the reasons that brought us here together and then One Health approach. Understand soil microorganisms and their role in biodiversity. It's very important. There are wars between words, and a comment in Russian I won't even address, even though I want to. Equitable use of natural resources, basic conservation education in schools and all university courses, more focus on conservation and One Health and veterinary education. Every generation is important and we all make a change. Let's do not forget this. Sensibiliser et réduire la consommation, collaborer avec tous les partenaires One Health. Another on the One Health side, collaborate avec two the partners within One Health, if I understood correctly. Protect our natural environments, diplomacy, nature-based solutions that keep equilibrium, do not disrupt the natural order. That's called sustainability, of course. Yes, we should get back to that. And I think we can, I'm gonna read this last one and then we're gonna move forward on the sake of time. Collaboration with involved stakeholders related to One Health. Yes, exactly that. Okay. I'm getting the translation of the Russian one. Cooperation of all the interest parties. Thank you very much, Agim. Great. And the last but not least, did you enjoy global networking today and find it useful? So now is your time to answer. And please let me remind you that this is only one tiny step of all the networking we need to do, especially regarding wildlife. We know like the different parts and different sectors rely on different ministry within the countries. So networking is more important than ever in this particular theme. I want to network more. Yes, you will have to network more. In the chat, you will find the link to vote. Thank you very much. And we're eager to hear your comments and how we can improve. And also, what are your plans for the next World Wildlife Day? Because we're planning to stay here for a long time. Great, more answers coming. But I think we get an idea. And I hope we got you like an example of things that you can do. Doesn't matter if there's a pandemic going on, there's like we all like going out recently from our places and trying to find out a new common ground to work amongst stakeholders. And we found an opportunity to work among regions. So all challenges comes as new opportunities. Some networking is okay. well, not, I prefer not to work responses so far, at least, unless I think we can now go to the next one. So as we know, wildlife is a valuable asset for many communities across the world. By protecting wildlife health, we safeguard biodiversity and invest in a healthier and more sustainable future. And for the closing remarks, we have come to an end, yes. For the closing remarks, it is my pleasure to give the floor to our Director General, Dr. Monique Eloy. The floor is yours.
Yes. Sorry, and good evening or good afternoon. I don't know, or maybe very early for some of you. Therefore, good afternoon, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have been interested in the intervention of the speakers, whom I warmly thank, and that you are now better informed about the activities carried out by the OIE on wildlife. And I attended the last minute of the meeting, and apparently that was a very fruitful and an active webinar. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to close the today webinar, and I would like to quote Mrs. Goodall as a preamble to my speech. She said, "Every individual matters. Every individual has a role to play, and every individual makes a difference." And through her outstanding introduction, Ms. Goodall reminds us in a humble but masterful way that wildlife is essential for life on Earth. Every animal has a role to play in nature. Animals are team players. Every animal is part of a community which maintains the ecosystem in balance and harmony. Some pollinate, others clean water rivers, maintain forests and clear natural areas, remove crops, and so on. And we, humans, are part of the same ecosystem. Every one of us has an impact on nature, and each of us can choose to act in a way which keeps the ecosystem healthy and sustainable. And today, on World Wildlife Day, we celebrate wildlife and raise awareness to the importance of their health and their contribution to resilient ecosystems. We have heard from a tremendous range of speakers from across the globe, highlighting the critical role of wildlife and what is might be considered as a cornerstone in One Health. All around the world, we face multiple challenges involving wildlife health. A greater frequency of emerging disease events is accelerated by biodiversity loss and driven by the nature and frequency of interactions between humans, animals, and the environment. There is recognition of an urgent need to strengthen the wildlife component of One Health. And the World Organization for Animal Health is no newcomer to wildlife health. With the support of our working group, which includes world-leading wildlife experts and a global network of national focal points, EU and reference centers, the OIE has been working to integrate wildlife health into its policy for 30 years. However, we recognize that is not enough and that we need to be much more proactive to meet the dual goals of protecting wildlife and achieving One Health. In response, we have developed and operationalized a strategy, the OIE Wildlife Health Framework, which aims to meet these goals through action and partnerships. We have highlighted this word, partnership, action, involvement, commitment. And as Director General of the OIE, I give this my full support. We all recognize that the health of wildlife, wild animals, domestic animals, humans, and the environment is inextricably linked. It is the essence of One Health. One Health can only be achieved if everyone takes ownership. I therefore encourage you all to integrate similar objectives into your national programs. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for taking up the challenge and contributing to a healthy planet for all the living beings. I thank you for your commitment and for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Director General. And we have come to an end of the webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us today for the Global Wildlife Health, Connecting Wildlife Health Stakeholder Globally on the occasion of the World Wildlife Day. Special thanks to the speaker, to the EC also, all over the globe for bringing passion and knowledge, and to the interpreters for once again bringing us closest together. As we know, human and the environment are interconnected, as well as the ecosystems, and the OIE is addressing challenges involving wildlife health through a wildlife health framework, because protecting the animals is preserving the future. I would like to request Bas and Lesa to turn on the cameras, as they were the organizers of this webinar. And everyone else is invited also to turn on your cameras to feel a bit closer together, even though we're virtually connected. For the farewell. Hi, Akerim. Thank you, everyone.